Thank you very much. I am a professor of law and public policy at American University in Washington, D.C. And when I am not busy teaching students, one of the things that I do is I do assessments and evaluations of legal aid systems, both domestically and abroad. I have asked to have put on your USB at the end of the conference 2 studies that I have been part of that give you a little bit of a sense of the work that I have done. And given this kind of work that I've done, I've been very pleased throughout the conference to hear it said over and over again that people are very interested in creating data and doing assessments of legal aid systems throughout the world. But I've also had a sense throughout the conference that there's not a lot of projects that have yet been done, that we want to do them, but that we aren't quite sure yet how to do them, or we don't have the resources or the like. And so what I would like to do today in my allotted 10 minutes is to talk to you a little bit about what the process is like. I do not have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to see this as an introduction to a dialogue for us to continue it either in the question and answer session or afterwards at lunch. There will be some very detailed PowerPoints that are excellent that I know will be coming afterwards. What I want to do is give you a sense before that of how is evaluation done? Why are we doing it? How is it done? From the perspective of someone who does this, what is it that we're doing or that we're asking you to do when we work with you on evaluation? And I think the first thing to understand is why is it that we do these things? And there are generally four reasons that we do this. Number one is descriptive. I have been surprised in the work that I've done that oftentimes when we go in and do an assessment for a legal aid provider, we come back and we tell them what we found and they say, wow, I didn't understand my attorneys were doing that. We're appearing in those courts, we're doing these sorts of things. So first of all, it can be very important for the agency, for the provider to understand what's actually happening, what the services are that you are actually engaged in. Second of all, resources. We all know that this is a period where everyone is clamoring for resources. An evaluation can do several things. Number one, it can build the case for more resources. Second of all, it can be helpful in pushing back against those who want to cut resources. This is particularly important when you hear that magic word efficiency. We hear that over and over again. Legal aid systems should be efficient. And indeed, we are all in favor of ensuring that the money that goes to legal aid is used effectively and to the best purposes. But efficiency sometimes is a smokescreen for cutting resources to legal aid. And by doing an assessment, by doing an evaluation, we can push back oftentimes and show how the resources are being used and indeed how more resources are needed. Also, I've seen this be very helpful in legal aid providers being able to make the case that they need to be equal to the prosecution in terms of the resources that are made available to them. Third, another reason to do an evaluation is to maintain or to ensure and oftentimes to improve the quality of the provision of legal aid services. And finally, it is very, very important, especially where I come from in the United States, to build legitimacy for legal aid. One thing we say over and over again in America is that there is no political constituency for the clients of legal aid. They are oftentimes at the margins of society. They rarely vote. And in a democratic system, well, at least allegedly democratic system that we live in, it becomes very difficult to make the case for additional tax dollars going to legal aid. An assessment and evaluation that is showing that actually the work that's being done is quite good, or here's how to improve it, and how to make it more effective can be very helpful in pushing back. So how do you do it? It's really a 3-step process. Number one, it's important to determine what the issue of concern is that you want to evaluate. Second of all, you need to collect data, and finally you need to compare it. And the problem in many evaluations is people jump to the data collection stage immediately. They think, oh, what do we want to do? We want to find out what's happening. Let's go get a lot of data of what's happening in our system. And indeed, data collection is important, but it is useless unless you first decide what it is you are trying to evaluate. And generally here, there are 4 areas that we are trying to evaluate. Number one, we are oftentimes looking at the independence of legal aid services provision. Number two, we are looking at the workload of those who are providing legal aid. Number three, we are looking at the activities that they are engaged in. And number four, we are looking at the quality of the legal services provision. Now, these will merge between them, but actually the hardest part of an assessment or an evaluation system is determining those criteria that we are going to do the evaluation on. And I know that sounds probably crazy to you, but it is easier for me to figure out what data to collect once I know, let me try that again. It is easier for me to collect the data than it is for me and those of us who are engaged in the process to determine what the criteria are that are important for the assessment. Those criteria are essentially your definitions of success. So let me take you through these four. So for example, if what we're concerned about is the independence of legal services provision, we're looking at such questions. These are the kinds of data that we are going to go out and look at. Who appoints the defense lawyer, and how is that done? When in the process does a defendant get representation? Who makes the decisions on case strategy? Who decides on resources, and how readily available are those resources? Also, fundamentally inherent in all of these questions is, are clients being represented at all by the legal aid provider? If the concern is workload, if that's the measure of success, if that's the criterion, then the kinds of data that we are going to go look at are such things as the amount of money that comes in to the legal aid service provider and the money that goes out. We want to make sure, of course, that the money that comes in doesn't go to someone else's pocket. Money that comes in, money that goes out, do they match? Second of all, how much money is available per case? So of all that money that's available for the agency, how much of it actually goes to an individual case? Third, the number of cases that are being heard by the agency. How many cases are being taken by lawyer? How many cases, what's the caseload per investigator, if there are investigators or staff members? How long does it take the case to complete? What's the average case length? If the criterion is one of the activities that the attorneys or staff are engaged in, we're going to look at such things as the amount of time that is spent on a case and where in the process of prosecution and defense that time is spent. Is it spent prior to indictment? Is it spent at trial? We're going to look at the type of work done. So for example, the number of motions that an attorney files, the number of experts that they use, if any, how often do they plead the case out, and when in the case is it pled out. Finally, if it's an issue of quality, we're going to look at many of the same things that I mentioned earlier, but we're also going to look at outcomes. We heard yesterday by a dear colleague in the United Kingdom that the true measure of quality is simply outcome. I would beg to differ on that and would be delighted to talk to you further about that in the question and answer, but there is no doubt that outcome matters. We want to look at, was the case a conviction, an acquittal, a dismissal? What was the sentence? Was this by trial or was it by plea? At what stage in the process was the case completed? Was it dismissed early after indictment? Did it go all the way to trial? And finally, was there much training and supervision available for attorneys and staff? Now this is all very good. These are the first two steps. They tell us what the criteria are. They tell us what the data are that we're going to collect. But if we were to stop here, all I would have for you is a descriptive picture of what your system looks like. We'd be able to say, yes, this is the number of days that on average it takes for a case to complete. But what you really want to know, or I should say what the people I work with want to know, is they want to know how their experience compares with something else. So the final piece here is a comparative piece. You need to be able to compare what you're finding to something else. And it can be generally, I feel like today I'm talking in the rule of 4. Everything seems to be 4. 4 reasons, 4 criteria, 4 comparisons. So what are those comparisons? Either 1, what happened before, and what you're doing now. So potentially there was not a legal aid provider before, or you've added new attorneys, or you've tried a new system. So how is what's going on now, how does it compare to what you were doing before? That would be one comparison. Another comparison that I love to do is a comparison of defense providers as against prosecutors. What is their caseload versus prosecutors' caseloads? What are resources available? And I should say that these kinds of results have been very helpful in the jurisdictions in which I've worked in making the argument to governments and in lawsuits to improve things. I notice I'm at the end of time. Let me give you the last two comparisons. One may be comparing individual defense lawyers, either lawyers in your office, do you have outliers, or comparison against your attorneys as against privately retained. And finally, and this is the one where most comparisons are done, that's comparisons against some sort of external standard, set by courts, set by governments, bar associations, multinational bodies, or NGOs. So this is, in a nutshell, what an evaluation looks like. You will hear, as I said in a moment, what some people who've done these will be able to tell you about their results. My results are also available on the USB, but I need to emphasize to you that it is imperative to be doing an assessment. It's an imperative to do an assessment for several reasons. Most importantly, for you to know what's going on in your office, and for you to be able to make the case to others who control your resources why it is that what you're saying about your situation is true. Why should they believe you? And with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be delighted to take questions later.